Welcome everyone to our Aotearoa New Zealand Lunch and Learn series in partnership with 2 Aotearoa Volunteering New Zealand. My name is Kelsey, and with this series we intend to support you all with the amazing mahi you do by inviting along thought leaders in the volunteering space to have insightful kōrero over your lunch break. Very excited this morning to be kicking off our first one of these for 2026 and to have Chris Efford joining us today. So Chris is a senior community and youth sector leader based on New Zealand's West Coast. He holds national and regional leadership roles with Hato Hone St John and serves as the chief executive of Family Start West Coast /Bulla, bringing extensive experience in youth development, volunteer leadership, and social services. Welcome, Chris, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, thank you, Kelsey, and yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So just quickly before we kick things off, as we always do, for those of you who aren't aware of Rosterfy, we've been around for 8 years now, and we're used by over 5 million volunteers and staff worldwide. We've recently ticked over 150 million hours of volunteering powered by Rosterfy across 35 different countries, and we are all about connecting communities to events and causes that they are the most passionate about. So just quickly on the screen, I've got some of the global and local customers that we have that currently use Rosterfy. And at the very end as well, I'll have a QR code up on the screen. If anyone would like to scan it and learn a little bit more, we can always book in a conversation. But I don't like to spend too much time on this. I love to dive straight into the questions with Chris, because not only have I got my own questions, but I know quite a few of you sent some through already as well, and we want to have a Q&A at the end as well. So kicking things off, Chris, what do you think motivates Gen Z to volunteer today, and what do organizations often get wrong?
Absolutely. It's a tricky one to answer, finding out what motivates young people sometimes. I think we need to remember that young people are exposed to quite a lot of content these days around what's going on with the world, and so I think what really motivates and attracts young people to volunteering is having some meaningful input and trying to make a change in their communities, or sometimes even on a larger scale. So I think that's a really big motivation for them, is making that difference. In terms of what organizations sort of get wrong along the way, I think it's important that we don't use this sort of what can often be seen as young people are lazy and not wanting to volunteer. I think that's a really big mistake. I think we just have to remember that young people have got a lot going on these days, and it's just about sort of fitting in with them, really, in terms of what they're willing to commit and how we can work with them to make it happen.
So more of that sort of storytelling aspect of why should that young person be passionate about what you're doing as an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So making sure that your organization's values and missions and goals are really clear, and they'll soon figure out whether their own values align with what your organization's trying to achieve. And if they feel like they can put some value in and make some significant contributions, then and like we all do when we volunteer, so it's no different for young people, but they put real value on that.
Absolutely. And what do you think young people want from volunteering beyond just giving back? What other value is there for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, aside from that there's so much pressure on them these days to have full and complete CVs and all this other stuff. So I mean, aside from the basic wanting to have it on their CV and being able to include it for their job prospects and stuff, it goes back to having that meaningful change again. So they want to give back, but they want it to be meaningful. So if they can see that they're actively making a difference, I think that's what they want to get out of it.
I think part of that being able to see things, we work with a lot of young people at universities and across our organizations when they partner with Rosterfy. One of the features of our platform that resonates most with these younger volunteers is actually being able to log into their portal or look at their app and see like the rolling amount of hours that they've actually done, or if they've earned any badges or things, because sometimes it can get lost in the abyss. And actually being able to say, oh, I've actually hit 50 hours of volunteering this year, that makes me feel really good about the impact that I've had, or receive a certificate. We do automation around that as well to say, thanks for doing 50 hours of volunteering with us, then I can then put on my LinkedIn. Those little features where I think being able to see it visually for a younger volunteer and being able to say, actually, this is making me feel good because I can see my hours stack up. It's not gamifying because they're not necessarily getting anything back in that way, but it's definitely that positioning of, oh, I can see with my eyes actually how many hours I've done. I'm not forgetting, and it's obvious to me. That's definitely a feature that really resonates.
Yeah, absolutely, and everybody's online these days, and having access to that sort of continuous feedback, instant sort of gratification. That's exactly a huge tool that we can use to support them in doing that as well.
And how do you think that organizations can attract these Gen Z volunteers when they're already juggling often work, study, and life?
Yeah, what I've found, I mean, if we look at the broader volunteering context as well, this isn't unique to young people. This is, in a lot of communities, you often see, the same volunteer doing lots of volunteer roles across different things. So people are already struggling, especially lately, around juggling, study and life and work and stuff. So what I've noticed is one thing that's been an effective way, and that young people tend to appreciate, is that sort of episodic or periodic volunteering. So not a huge commitment to such a long-term, volunteer position, but it might be project-based, volunteering stuff that they can do. So that tends to be a really cool way that you can get young people engaged, particularly if they're studying at uni and have got all of those, deadlines and studies and stuff. If they can engage when and when they want to and when they're able to, that's a huge way of getting them on board.
I think as well, there sometimes can be a little bit of a barrier put up of awkwardness if a volunteer feels like they've committed and then life's taken them away about, well, how do I come back? Because I feel like I might have already let that organization down. And so removing that barrier to awkwardness as much as possible. And whether that's setting up volunteers to be able to easily look at what opportunities are available. With Rosterfy, we have an app where they can jump in and say, oh, actually, I've got some time on Saturday and there's something here I can get stuck in for, and I've got meet all the requirements, so I don't need to worry about anything like that. So that ease of use, but really making it in comms and things for younger volunteers, like, we understand you might have to take a bit of time off. You're always welcome back. We'd love to have you whenever you can be here, and keeping that really that feeling nice rather than that awkwardness of, oh no, I haven't been in a couple of months. They'll be frustrated with me. I'm just not going to reach out again at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And also being really clear from the outset in terms of what's expected in the role, so that they can make a judgment call right from the beginning around whether that's something that they're able to, contribute to, and then being accountable to that. Volunteers and young people, everybody needs that accountability as well. So, and just because it's a volunteer role doesn't mean that, we haven't agreed to do our job. And it's pretty clear if we know what our expectations are, if the young people know what their expectations are, you're more likely to get the most out of them, and they know what they're coming to.
Absolutely. That kind of leads into my next question. We've half answered it already, around how organizations can offer that flexibility without losing that reliability and accountability. So is it just about figuring out what roles are able to offer that and then positioning those to those younger volunteers to set them up for success? Or are there other things that you think organizations need to be aware of in that space as well?
Yeah, I would challenge people to not just stick with the status quo in terms of any role that especially volunteer roles. I would even have the discussion directly with the young people. You can often find, and they can often come up with solutions to problems. And we often get stuck in our ways that something's been done this way for so long. It's quite good to have that different perspective. And so, that I talked about that, periodic volunteering and that short-term volunteering. That doesn't mean that you've only got a young person for a short amount of time. It just means that the projects that they're working on, will change and differ every few months or however long. So you've still got a long-term volunteer. It's just rotating around what they're doing to provide some variety. And it's all about when they can work as well. Often roles are 9 to 5. That's the reality of some roles, but actually there would be some flexibility within that to work condensed hours, different hours. There's a whole lot of options that I think we should consider. And if somebody can come, especially if a young person can come and say, hey, I think I can do it this way, just be open to that and see what they come up with.
Yeah, and I think there's two things there. I think one, and this comes back to technology a little bit, there's a huge benefit, I think, to understanding or getting volunteers to let you know when am I actually available, and then having technology that allows you to match roles to be like, actually, well, this is this person's availability. We can send them out a notification to say we've got something available and we need help. And then the second part to that is a lot of organizations I speak with, they're in this, and I think this is very common, they're in this weird sort of middle phase where they've got an older demographic of volunteers that's been with them forever, and they're very, I don't know if stubborn is the right word, but they're very clear on how they want things done. They've always done it the same way. They don't like change. They're very adverse to change and that change management piece. But they're also wanting to attract this younger demographic of volunteer. And often when I ask them, well, what do you think your younger volunteers want? Have you spoken to them? The conversations haven't been had. So they're speaking with this older demographic a lot more, and they're not speaking as much with these younger ones coming through and having an understanding of what they actually would want from their experience and what would make it easier for them, like how they would actually remove those barriers to entry. So I think exactly what you're saying about opening those and having those conversations and letting them, the people that you want to come through, guide you on that change is really impactful, or can be really impactful.
Yeah, and also, asking yourself or yourself as an organization, why are you wanting young people, volunteering? You need to be able to clearly articulate that to the young people that, that you're wanting, because, if you're wanting them for tokenistic reasons, just to say you've got young people, you're probably not going to get much meaningful, volunteering from them. So, have a genuine reason as to, why you want them there. And there are tons of genuine reasons that you want young people in your organisation, if not for the simple fact that they'll be there one day. So, get them on board early, right?
And figuring out, how you can establish some volunteer leaders within that volunteer space that you have as well. So you're not just having, the obviously the most valued volunteers that you've had for many, many years, but you've also got some new ones coming through that are leading that charge and helping to recruit those younger ones through as well, and understanding the space. Definitely. What do you think meaningful recognition looks like for Gen Z? I think we've touched on a little bit of it, but is there anything else you have to add to that?
Yeah, just as long as it's not tokenistic, you want to be, providing, genuine recognition for when stuff goes well. And, positive reinforcement goes down well for everyone, right? But, particularly young people. So finding those opportunities to give them, the praise that, that they deserve and that they need, and it's, and just being genuine about it. Don't do it for the sake of doing it, but you should be doing it genuinely, because there's lots of good reasons to do that too.
Yeah. And do you have any thoughts on like how regularly these sort of volunteer recognition pieces should happen? There's some people that, there's like, once a year volunteer, the day that we have for volunteers to recognise them, or do you think it should be happening a lot more regularly to sort of help build that relationship as we go through?
I think, I think it needs to be much more regular. I mean, it's great that we've got, international, volunteer manager days and international volunteer days, and we should absolutely celebrate those. But no, whoever is, the team lead or the direct report for these volunteers, it should be on a regular flowing basis. And I don't want to say once a month, you need to do this. It should just be keeping a lookout for when, there are times that you should be doing it, and acknowledging, what they're doing. And actually, I think it's a really cool way to be able to promote this within your organisation for volunteers to be able to highlight the work that other volunteers are doing as well, not just from managers. So that peer nominating for recognition or shouting them out for something is a really cool way of doing that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's more of a milestone piece in there as well, to say, hey, you've done this with us and that means so much and we're so grateful. Or, within Rosterfy, as I said, we've got a automation around, like, when you've had a certain number of hours, maybe a team member's alerted, like, hey, this volunteer's actually done 50 hours now with you. And maybe also you've got an automation that they get sent a beautiful email, or they get sent a certificate, or they earn a badge, or then the volunteer manager can call them as well. So there's lots of those little touch points throughout there, and you can really start understanding which of your volunteers are engaging the most, and you're not losing any where they don't feel appreciated along the way as well, despite how many hours they might be putting in with you.
Yeah, and just on that a little bit, service and the amount of time, absolutely good to recognise that, but definitely recognising when they're going above and beyond as well for other staff if they're achieving, to a high level. So more than just service, yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you said before about getting other volunteers involved in recognising and maybe putting people forward for the work they're doing, there's something to that as well. That peer to peer can really strengthen that relationship with each other in terms of volunteers, but then also within your organisation.
Yeah, Hato Hone St John does that in a really, really cool way. They've got like a volunteer team of the month award that they consider every month, and peers can nominate one another for that, and that works really, really well. So it's just the small things, and they can make a huge difference, particularly for young people. They all add up.
Absolutely. And how do you think volunteering can become a genuine pathway to skills, confidence, or employment?
Oh, I mean, it already is. Like, there are so many transferable skills in volunteering that you can use in any job. I certainly wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for all the volunteering that I've done within St John. There's the leadership skills that you're getting from managing volunteers if you're a volunteer leader, and depending on the job, you can find so many volunteer positions that are similar to paid roles. So the values are immense, really. And employers, speaking as an employer myself as well, if I see volunteering on your CV, then, well, actually that's a huge checkbox for me. They're willing to give back to their community, and so it's a huge it's a good thing to have.
Yeah, and do you think there's a way that organizations can support, or I suppose communicate this with when they're trying to recruit new volunteers, like really communicate, actually these are the skills you're actually going to walk away with, or here's actually the impact that volunteering might have on your career? Do you think that organizations are doing that well, or do you think that there's some extra things that they could be doing?
There is always always room to improve on that, but yes, absolutely. If you can highlight in the cover in your position descriptions or whatever, that this sort of work, this sort of volunteer work can lead on to this example of paid employment, that's a really good way of attracting people into to volunteer as well. You've got young people, and I'm using St John as an example because that's where I spend a lot of my volunteer time, but there are pathways within the youth program to pathways to become to head towards paramedic, and a lot of what you're doing in the youth program, I mean, volunteering in St John is going to help you along that pathway. And paramedicine's just one example, because obviously St John is very health based, but in any volunteer role, it's gonna lead to something.
Yeah, I think in so many volunteer roles, people actually underestimate how many, like, the skills that you can develop from them that you can't get anywhere else. Like, I have volunteered both at Lifeline in New Zealand and now at Lifeline Australia as a crisis supporter, and that was like baptism by fire almost in so many ways. And I think it's done more things for my communication skills than really any other role I've had has, really, because it's put me in a position of really getting to know my community. And yeah, I'm forever grateful for that. Despite how many hours I might have done, I feel like I've got, double load back in terms of what it's done for me. I think those stories and sharing them can be really important as well, and maybe getting your young people to talk about actually how volunteering has impacted and how it's changed their life as well.
Yeah. And sharing those as almost testimonials, and that's another great way of getting them on board, and showing those real life examples is really, really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. How do values, purpose, and identity influence Gen Z's volunteering choices, do you think?
I think that's probably one of the most important things. I sort of alluded to it before around your organisation's values and mission. Young people want to give back and do so in a meaningful way. So they want to see that your organisation's values and purpose are clearly aligned with their own. And so you've got to make sure that your organisation's identity is fit for purpose in terms of aligning with young people. It's as simple as that, really. And it's not just young people, even. If your values are matching an individual's values, then you're on the right track of getting people to volunteer for you.
And what are some practical low-cost changes that you think organisations can make to better engage young volunteers?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, define low cost, right? I mean, for some smaller organisations, updating your values and your mission and your vision, that can be fairly low cost to align that. And having young people contribute to that conversation. In fact, not just contribute, but even lead it and be there with an equal say. That can be a really valuable way of doing that. I understand that for larger organisations, changing some of that stuff can be quite expensive. But actually, if that's something that should be reviewed, fairly regularly. And if it's coming up for your organisation, I would suggest that actually you get some young people at that table that can contribute to that conversation and have that say. So that's really, really important. Some other things, we all know that young people these days are on social media and they're online. I mean, that's a little bit of a misperception as well, really. Like, I think you'll be surprised at how not online some of these young people are as well. So I would say just having multiple ways of outreach to get these young people in. So don't just stick to your one method of communication. Broaden that across multiple social medias, multiple physical posters, all of that sort of stuff. You've got to be widespread, because everybody does it differently. Not all young people are on the same platform, so always fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how do you see volunteering models needing to evolve over the next few years to stay relevant for younger generations?
Yeah, I think stuff in this space, particularly in the young people volunteering, is changing all the time. I think it's just something that needs to be reviewed probably annually, to be fair. And I think it needs to be done with those young people at the table. I spoke about periodic volunteering. That's, I think, an effective way to engage people at the moment. That might be different next year. So I think my advice there would be to continually look at at your policies and your procedures around how you're, recruiting these people, how you're keeping them engaged, and keeping them involved at that level, and updating that regularly, because it does change every 5 minutes.
Absolutely. And I think from speaking to friends of mine over the years that have been involved with volunteering, a lot of the frustration has always come from maybe older processes that haven't been updated. So there's so many different systems being used or different bits of paperwork, and they get frustrated or they don't know where they're at in the process, and then they fall off. And then they said, they just didn't make it easy enough for me to stay involved. And I want to stay involved, but I don't know how I can give back. I don't know what's available. I don't know what I can do. And so obviously, one option for that is technology and centralizing that for volunteers and letting them jump in and maybe cross-pollinate across roles and really see what's available and how else they can get involved. But yeah, I think really reviewing, as you've said, and always looking just to streamline and say where are the barriers to entry for volunteers, because we've just added processes over and over every year, and we've not actually reviewed them and refined them, and who actually are we trying to bring in as our new cohort, and what do they want from this, and what is that process like for them, and where are they bottlenecking, and where are we losing them. I think a review of that annually, as you've said, can be so impactful to success ongoing of keeping these volunteers engaged.
Yeah, absolutely, and having them being part of that review process. Don't decide things for young people. Have them in that conversation. It'll make your life easier.
Absolutely, yeah. Amazing. So those were my questions. I'm moving across to a few we've already had emailed through. For everyone else on the call, we do have a question box at the top right-hand corner. Feel free to drop in any questions that you have there. But the first one I have is someone emailed through asking about what the plan you have put in place for volunteers that are under 18 that are working alongside other adults. So it's a bit around that child protection to keep those young volunteers safe. Anything on that?
Yeah, I'm involved in a few different youth organisations, and across the board they sort of do it very similarly. It is about having a robust child protection policy. In fact, I think that's a legal requirement that if you're working with young people, you should have a child protection policy. And that's outlining your processes and what you should be doing. Regarding the specific processes there, if depending on age, definitely if they're under 16, you need to have some sort of parental consent. You should be doing some sort of risk assessment, all of those stuff, and keeping those young people and their parents up to date with any changes and stuff. So it's not rocket science, and you shouldn't be put off by paperwork or being too risk adverse, but you've just got to make sure you've got those right policies and you're following them.
Okay, awesome. I had another attendee send through a question around how they have really strong relationships with some high schools, and those high schools encourage volunteer service hours, so their students to come in and sort of help them to achieve recognition as part of a bunch of things that they might need to pass year 9 or year 10, etc. They said that they do have a strong pool of students that come to a lot of the events, but some of them that come in, they feel like they maybe aren't as engaged, so they're not really interested in what they're doing, and they're just there to sort of tick over hours, and they find their teams are getting a bit frustrated that not every student gets stuck in or gives it their all. And so I think there's a few parts of this question. The first is, do you have any tips on how you think you could make it more engaging for those students that just don't want to be there but have to feel like they have to come along? And then also maybe any sort of sense checking around how to pick out when a student might not be in the right headspace and maybe isn't the best to be there. And then how do you manage 2 students out of the 20 that might be disengaged, and managing that sort of interaction as well? Throwing a lot at you there, Chris, for the final question.
Yeah. Multi-pronged there. I
Yes.
think probably firstly it comes down to your relationship with where these, obviously if they're coming from the schools, your relationship with the school. My sense would be that yes, they are required to do some volunteer hours, but my sense would be that they're not specifically required to do it with you. So I would be going back to the school and having a conversation around, actually, is your organisation the right place for these students to be doing that volunteer? If they're not interested, you need to be getting something from this as well. So setting those clear expectations with the schools and with the people and the young ones that are volunteering, and making sure that they understand that, I think that's the first thing. And dealing with disengaged kids and young people, I'd be sitting down with them, and I'd be explaining to them that this is, an opportunity for them. It's a benefit to them, and I'd be sitting down with them and seeing, actually, what they want to get out of this, and seeing if you can brainstorm some ideas with them around how they can, meaningfully contribute, and earn the hours essentially that they're volunteering for. And in regards to the one where you've got two that are, not doing so well and everybody else is on board, that's always hard. Again, when you're working with young people, you're not, as a volunteer organisation, we're generally not trained to be, teachers or or behavioural specialists or whatever. So it's really hard to manage that sort of behavior per se. So I would be putting that squarely back in the hands of the organisation that you're working with that's providing those volunteers. And I think it comes back to having those strong relationships and strong boundaries.
And maybe it's a little bit like what you were talking about before, where if there are a couple of students that are really engaged and passionate, how can you utilize those students to understand, what might the rest of the students want to get out of that, and help to shape the program a little bit more, or kind of get the engagement of the others as well. I think there's something in that potentially too.
Absolutely.
Right. We've run out of time here, so I'm going to pause there on the questions. Any further ones that come through, we can share them across with Chris. I did have the QR code up on the screen there that you can scan, obviously, to find out a little bit more about Rosterfy. But here are my contact details otherwise. And I just wanted to extend a really big thank you to Chris for joining us today. Really interesting kōrero here, and we appreciate your time and all of the mahi that you're doing in your space. So thank you so much. Anyone on the call feels like they have something that they might like to join our webinar for and share with the community, obviously we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear about all the great work that people are doing in this space. But otherwise, mā te wā, everyone, and thank you so much for sharing your lunch break with us. And we hope to see you again on our next session, which we'll be in touch with about soon. So thank you, Chris, and have a great day, everyone.
Kia ora.